I kept reading, watching as the candle to my left grew larger, its flame burning brighter and bigger. The words on the page were strange, difficult to pronounce. I had to read them letter by letter. Then I heard the piercing scream of a woman behind me, a terrifying sound that cut through the silence. At the same time, I felt sharp claws, like those of a hawk digging into my back. Have you ever heard of treasure hunters seeking ancient relics? And is it true that such treasures are guarded by jinn? Let's listen to this story told by Imran from Yemen. But before we dive into the story, don't forget to support the channel with a like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell. Let's get started. Imran begins his story. I am a Yemeni citizen from a rural village in the Almawit Governorate. In 2005, I encountered the most terrifying story of my life, all because of my obsession with treasures and my relentless pursuit of them. I will also share details about the infamous Sha'ar book, often warned about in such tales. Listen carefully to my story. Imran continues, I lived with my family, which included my mother, father, and siblings, in a historical mountain village. I was the youngest among my siblings, and my parents were elderly. All my brothers were married and lived in their own nearby homes, while my sisters were also married. Only one sister remained at home, taking care of our parents and attending to their needs. I was an unemployed young man, spending my days wandering through the village, the mountains, and the valleys with my friends. I had no job or responsibilities. My friends and I frequently visited an old cemetery located about 2 kilometers from our village. It was near an abandoned village with ruined buildings dating back to the Ottoman era, once inhabited by a Jewish community. This village is now deserted, but still holds historical significance. We often heard many stories about this cemetery. While exploring it, we would come across pits, evidence of people who had attempted to dig up something valuable. Nearby there was an old house owned by my father, inherited from my grandfather. This house had become abandoned and severely deteriorated over time. I often heard rumors that my grandfather's house contained a treasure. People spoke of individuals who tried digging inside, only to encounter a black snake, said to be the guardian of the treasure, a jinn. I wasn't sure whether these tales were true or just myths, but my obsession with finding treasures grew stronger with each passing day. I always dreamed that I would find a treasure that would change my life and the lives of my family. Every time I passed by the cemetery or the abandoned village, the dream grew stronger within me. My obsession with treasures increased when we found freshly dug pits in the cemetery covered with white cement, suggesting that someone had discovered a treasure there. There was talk in the village about people who had dreams where men appeared to them, revealing the locations of treasures, but on the condition that a sacrifice be made, like cutting off a small finger from a family member. Naturally, everyone refused such things. Still, I couldn't stop dreaming about finding a treasure. One day, I heard about a book that was said to help people locate treasures. I asked someone I knew to get it for me, but he warned me severely, saying, Imran, this book is dangerous. You won't be able to handle it. If you start reading it and get scared or stop halfway, the jinn will harm you. If you finish it, your life will change forever. I insisted, replying, My heart has been dead for a long time, and I'm ready to endure anything. I believed this book would lead me to treasures and bury my family's poverty for good. But today, as I share this story with you, I ask for God's forgiveness and feel deep regret because I now realize that what I did was against my faith. The key moment came when I said to him, If I summon the jinn, I'll know where the treasures are. He responded, You seem so confident. If you can read this book and get past the 10th page without fear, you'll gain control over the jinn, and they will fulfill your wishes. I told him, I want that book. He replied, No problem, but let me repeat. You will witness things that your mind cannot handle, and if you feel fear, you may lose your sanity. I answered confidently, As long as I can bury my poverty, I don't care what happens afterwards. At that time, the only thing that mattered to me in life was myself, my desire for wealth, and escaping the poverty I was trapped in. He said to me, "All right, come to my house tomorrow after 6 in the evening, and I will explain everything to you and give you a copy of the Shah book. But you must come after sunset. It's absolutely essential." I asked him why, and he replied, "Because there are incantations that must be recited at a specific time. I will teach you how to do this, but there's a condition." I asked, "What's your condition?" He said, "If you succeed in reading the book, pass all the stages, and manage to control the jinn, who will guide you to the treasure and help you extract it, you must give me 1/3 of what you find. However, if you fail and cannot control the jinn, I am not responsible for any harm that befalls you." I agreed without hesitation. He wrote up an agreement on a piece of paper, absolving himself of any responsibility, and made me sign it with my fingerprint. He observed me closely and saw the courage and fearlessness in my eyes, despite all the warnings he had given me. The next day, I went to his house after 6 in the evening as agreed. He met me and repeated his warnings for the final time, but I was determined to proceed without any hesitation. He led me into one of the rooms in his house and brought out a very old box. Opening it, he took out a book wrapped in a piece of blue cloth. He handed me the book and said, "Do not open it unless you are completely undressed, wearing only what covers your private parts." I asked him why, and he explained, "Because anything you wear while reading the book may catch fire." I said, "No problem, I'll do as you say." Then he asked me, "Where will you read this book?" I replied, "At our house." He shook his head and said, "I don't recommend that. If you're serious about completing the ritual, it's better to read the book in an abandoned place. You mentioned your grandfather's abandoned house, didn't you?" I answered, "Yes, we have one." He said, "Go to that house at 11 o'clock at night on the day you plan to read the book. When you arrive, enter with your left foot first and find a suitable place to sit. Place a candle on your left and put the book in front of you without removing it from its cloth. Wait until the clock strikes midnight. At that moment you will hear a dog barking behind you. Do not turn around, do not be afraid, and do not take your eyes off the book. Once the barking stops completely, pick up the book, take it out of the cloth, and throw the cloth behind you without looking back. Read the cover of the book, letter by letter, without skipping a single word or letter. Once you've finished reading the cover, open the first page and read it in a low voice, carefully following the symbols and instructions exactly as they are written in the book. The third rule. No matter what you see or hear behind you, no matter if you feel something touching your body or if you see objects moving in front of you, do not be afraid and do not stop reading. I replied, "Understood." At that point, he asked me one last question. "Are you still serious about this?" I answered confidently. "I have nothing to lose." I understood everything he had taught me and resolved to follow it precisely. I took the book and left his house. As I walked away, it was nearing 9 in the evening. I felt overjoyed, believing that this would be the day I would achieve my dream of finding the treasure and escaping poverty. I was excited to follow every instruction he had given me. On my way back to my village to buy the items he had requested, I began to feel as though someone was following me. I turned around, but there was no one there. Maybe I'm imagining things, I thought to myself. I continued walking until I reached the village. I bought the candle and water from a shop and headed towards my grandfather's abandoned house. I didn't tell anyone what I was planning to do. I didn't share it with my friends because I wanted the treasure all for myself. My grandfather's house was a desolate place, with no doors or windows. It had been abandoned for decades, and part of its roof had even collapsed. I arrived there at around 11 at night. I remembered the sorcerer's instructions and entered the house with my left foot first. Back then, I considered myself brave, afraid of nothing, focused only on the treasure I believed would soon be mine. I walked into one of the deserted rooms and sat down exactly as the sorcerer had described, and this is where my story of terror and torment begins. If it weren't for God's mercy, I wouldn't have survived with my sanity intact, and my life might have been destroyed forever. I remember that day vividly. It was Sunday, the 2nd of July, 2005. I was sitting inside the room with a sandy floor, no windows, and a partially collapsed ceiling. I felt fear, despite my attempts to appear brave. Fear is a blessing from God, meant to deter humans from harming themselves or throwing themselves into destruction. I placed the candle to my left, secured on a stone, and the book in front of me. I waited as the clock crept closer to midnight. Suddenly, what the sorcerer had warned me about began to happen. I heard the sound of a dog growling and barking loudly behind me, as if it were right behind my head. I felt its hot breath on the back of my neck. Despite my fear, I remembered the sorcerer's words, "Do not turn around, no matter what." When the barking stopped, I took the book out of the cloth and began reading the incantations written on its cover. A chill ran through my body, but I pressed on. I opened the first page and started reading in a low voice. Suddenly, it felt as though the entire house was shaking. My fear intensified, but I knew that stopping the reading could expose me to harm from the demons. I kept reading, watching as the candle to my left grew larger, its flame burning brighter and bigger. The words on the page were strange, difficult to pronounce. I had to read them letter by letter. Then I heard the piercing scream of a woman behind me, a terrifying sound that cut through the silence. At the same time, I felt sharp claws, like those of a hawk digging into my back. At that moment, I began to falter in my reading, overcome by intense fear. I barely managed to finish the first page, feeling as though my soul was about to leave my body. But the journey was far from over. The woman's scream faded, and the candle's flame returned to its normal size. I continued onto the second page of the book. I remember that page vividly. It contained a drawing of a snake with incantations written within its coiled body to banish it. As I was reading and had yet to reach the drawing, a massive black snake appeared before me. Its mouth was open wide, and I could feel its cold breath on my face. I tried to remain composed and did not turn around, focusing solely on the reading. The snake began to coil around me, tightening its grip on my body. I could feel the pressure, yet I was still able to breathe normally, and continued reading the incantations within the drawing of the snake. With every word I uttered, the snake started to shrink little by little until it vanished completely. It was a terrifying experience, one only someone with a dead heart could endure. At that time, I was living in dire poverty, and nothing else mattered to me but burying that poverty forever. I finished the second page and turned to the third. Before I could start reading, a hideous creature appeared before me, accompanied by children with empty eyes and horrifying faces circling around me. One of them came closer, opening its mouth as if it were about to bite my hand. At that moment, I couldn't bear the fear or the terrifying sight of the creature. I turned to look at it, and the moment I did, I felt a powerful blow to my face, and everything went black. I woke up to find myself in the village graveyard at the time of the Fajr call to prayer. The shock was overwhelming, and my body was completely numb. I couldn't stand due to the sheer terror I had experienced. I began crawling on my knees, hearing voices and blood-curdling screams all around me. I swear it was the sound of the Adhan that saved me from the graveyard and the demons lurking within. As soon as the Fajr call ended, the voices and all the horrifying things disappeared. Exhausted beyond belief, I fainted again. After the Fajr prayer, the villagers began their day, and 2 of them found me lying on the ground. They recognized me and carried me back to my home. I was in a terrible state, unable to stand. When my mother saw me, she began screaming, asking, "What happened to you?" The villagers answered, "We found him in the graveyard after the Fajr prayer." My mother tried to speak to me, but I couldn't muster the strength to respond. I gestured to her that I was exhausted and asked her to let me sleep. That day, it felt like I had lived through every nightmare in the world in a single night. In my sleep, I dreamt of a massive black snake, with a foul odor swallowing me whole. I swear I could feel my body sliding inside the snake. I screamed for help, but no one could hear me. I saw my grandfather's house in the dream, engulfed in flames, burning to the ground. I woke up terrified, drenched in sweat. At 4 in the afternoon that same day, I left my house like a madman, running towards the neighboring village where the sorcerer who had given me the book lived. As I stepped outside, I saw a woman standing there, staring at me in a terrifying manner. She looked normal, but her appearance and gaze sent chills down my spine. I kept looking at her as I ran, consumed by fear, while hearing my mother calling after me, "Imran! Imran!" But I couldn't see anyone from my family. Everyone in the house, they were demons. I ran frantically, heading towards the sorcerer's village. I crossed the valley until I reached the base of the mountain. At that point there was no village, no people, just me in an eerily desolate place. It felt as if I was alone in the entire universe. I began shouting, "So-and-so, so-and-so," calling out the name of the man who had given me the book, but no one answered. Suddenly, I turned around and saw a bustling marketplace filled with people and a large city. I thought perhaps, out of sheer fear, I had somehow ended up in the city. Without hesitation, I entered the city, walking among the crowd, terrified and filled with dread. Everyone in the city was an old man. I didn't see any women or children. I walked among them dying of thirst. I approached a man in the market and said to him, "I'm thirsty, do you have any water?" Suddenly, he produced a glass of water in a way I couldn't comprehend. I took the glass and began drinking, but my thirst didn't leave me. It was as if I was in a dream. I looked back at the man who had given me the water, and his face, it was like a blank wall. No nose, no eyes, no mouth. At that moment I realized I was in a city of demons, and everyone around me, they weren't human. I started screaming, "I seek refuge in Allah from the accursed devil." Within moments everyone vanished and I was left alone. Looking around, I realized I was now standing on the mountain overlooking the village I had come from. Darkness had fallen and I began running down the mountain, desperate to reach the village. As I ran, I heard a voice behind me saying,
"Go back to the book. Go back to the book."
I kept running in sheer terror until I reached the village, but there was nothing left, only my grandfather's house. Every other house had disappeared. My grandfather's house was the only one remaining. I ran towards my grandfather's house, but suddenly a terrifying she-demon appeared in my path. She blew into my face, and the next thing I knew, I was falling into the valley. I had no idea how I ended up there or what had brought me to this place. I sat there crying out of sheer fear and exhaustion while hearing voices calling my name. The strange thing was that I could only hear my mother's voice clearly, while the other voices were horrifying and unearthly. I passed out and didn't wake up until the next day, only to find myself back in our house. My mother, father, and siblings were gathered around me, looking at me with confusion. I asked them, "Where am I?" They replied, "You're at home. We found you unconscious in the valley at midnight." My mother had thought I was dead. I said to her, "I'm thirsty." She gave me water, and I drank until I was satisfied. Then I began recounting everything that had happened. I told them I had taken a book filled with magical incantations to summon jinn and demons. My father was furious and demanded, "Where did you get this book? Don't you fear God? You'll harm yourself and harm us as well." I told them I had taken it from a man who claimed to be a sheikh. My father responded, "He's no sheikh, he's a fraudster." As I was explaining what had happened, the same she-demon I had seen at my grandfather's house suddenly emerged from the wall. She started breathing fire from her mouth and threatening me, saying, "Return to the book, or we'll harm you and your family." I screamed and pointed at her, but my family couldn't see anything. I fainted again and only woke up when my mother was splashing water on my face. My brothers decided to confront the man who had given me the book. When they met him, he coldly said, "I'm not responsible for your brother." This is a signed disclaimer. What happens to him now is none of my concern, but I want the book back, or I'll make him suffer. My brothers returned home and told me, "That man is nothing but a deceitful sorcerer who doesn't fear God. You've doomed yourself and dragged us into this mess with you." Imran said, "I found myself caught between two fires. Either I return to my grandfather's house, read the book, and banish these demons, or I risk harming myself and my family." I started thinking while terrified, trying to muster the courage to act. Finally, I told myself, I'll go back to my grandfather's house tonight. If I die, at least I'll die alone and not endanger my family. I told my brothers about my decision and said, "If I don't return within an hour, come to my grandfather's house to check on me, or take me out of there." Fear and panic were written all over their faces. Even my mother initially refused to let me go, but I told her, "It's either this, or our lives will be ruined forever." Finally, they all agreed, and the night fell upon us. We were sitting together in the house when suddenly we heard a sound resembling a buzzing beehive growing louder as it approached. The noise was unbearably disturbing. Moments later, the bathroom door in the living room began slamming open and shut violently and rapidly. We all rushed to the living room to see what was happening, and we saw the bathroom door opening and shutting with great force, with fire blazing inside. It was a terrifying sight. I never imagined that demons could harm us in such a way, but it didn't stop there. The kitchen door also started swinging open, and utensils began flying out, being thrown at us from inside. It felt as though someone was in the kitchen, wreaking havoc and hurling dishes at us. Overwhelmed by fear, we ran to our rooms, seeking refuge, while continuously reciting prayers and seeking protection from Satan. My father, enraged, shouted at me, "This is your fault! You brought this curse upon us because of your greed for treasure." Guilt consumed me as I realized that my family was suffering because of me. Seeing my mother and sister crying only deepened my pain. I couldn't take it anymore. I stepped into the living room, screaming at the top of my lungs, "I will return the book! I will return the book! Please do not harm us!" The moment I said those words, everything fell silent. It was as though nothing had happened. I made up my mind to leave the house despite my mother's desperate cries. I told them, "I'm going now. May God forgive me for my mistakes. I've done so much wrong." The clock was nearing 11 p.m. when I arrived at my grandfather's abandoned house. My brothers, paralyzed by fear, refused to accompany me. As I entered, I watched the door close behind me, and the walls and windows seal themselves shut. The house felt like a tomb. I went into the room where the book was, and there it was, surrounded by flames. I felt like death was imminent, but at that moment God granted me a courage I had never known. I approached the fire surrounding the book, and as soon as I reached it, the flames suddenly vanished. There, I found the candle I had left the first time when I started reading the book. I picked up the book, wrapped it in the blue cloth, and placed it inside a bag. Suddenly, the door swung open. I ran as fast as I could back home. My father took the book and returned it to the sorcerer. After that, everything went back to normal. I never saw those ghosts or demons again, and they never appeared in our lives. In conclusion, my friends, I must tell you, never engage in such matters. These books, despite their innocent appearance, contain magical incantations that can harm you and your loved ones. Curiosity can lead you into great trouble, so I urge you to stay away from these things. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit the like button and leave us a comment sharing your thoughts. If you're new here, make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss any of our upcoming content. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.